It's been 4 months, and the world is full of landmines I never knew existed. The electronic ding-dong of a convenience store door is the worst, a sound that makes my heart try to claw its way out of my throat. But it's also the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, the specific hum of a fluorescent light ballast, the sight of a bored teenager restocking energy drinks. My therapist, Dr. Albright, a kind woman with tired eyes, calls them classic PTSD triggers. She's given me worksheets on grounding techniques. Focus on 5 things you can see, Owen, for you can touch. It feels like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. She and everyone else, the cops, my concerned parents, they all think I'm haunted by the right things. They have a checklist for trauma and they expect me to tick the boxes. The gun, check. The sound of the shot, check. The memory of cold, grimy linoleum against my cheek, the certainty that I was about to die over a bottle of Advil. Big fat check. They think my problem is Travis, the strung-out kid in the cheap ski mask whose hands were shaking so badly I was more afraid of an accidental discharge than a deliberate one. But they're wrong. Travis was just noise. He was scared, desperate, predictable, human. What I see when I close my eyes, what ambushes me when I'm trying to choose a brand of toothpaste at the supermarket, is the face of the cashier. Elias, he's the ghost in my machine. I see him standing there behind the counter while a universe of chaos and adrenaline erupted just feet in front of him. And his face, God, his face was just nothing. It was a blank sheet of paper in the middle of a hurricane. No fear, no panic, not even surprise, just this pale, hollow-eyed calm. It wasn't the stillness of shock. I know what shock looks like. This was something else, something ancient and empty like a dry well. While I was trying to make myself smaller than a quarter on the floor, he just stood there, his hands resting flat on the counter as if he were waiting for the next customer. And that's the question that's eating me alive, the one that's 1,000 times more terrifying than any bullet. Why wasn't he scared? What did he know that I didn't? It was one of those nights. My head was splitting, a real jackhammer behind the eyeballs kind of migraine, and I was out of Advil. Of course I was. It was almost 2 a.m. and the only place open was the Quick Mart, a sad little box of fluorescent light and desperation that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and regret. Elias was behind the counter, same as always. He was a skinny guy, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair that always looked damp and the kind of profound stillness you usually see in animals that freeze instead of fleeing. We'd never spoken beyond him mumbling the total and me saying thanks. I grabbed the bottle of Advil, a bottle of water, and slapped them on the counter. He scanned them. $4.75, he said, his voice a low monotone that got swallowed by the hum of the drink coolers. I dug in my pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, and with it, a stray quarter tumbled out of my hand, hitting the counter with a clink before bouncing onto the floor and rolling under the candy rack. "Ah, damn it," I muttered. It was stupid, just a quarter, but my head was pounding and it felt like a personal insult from the universe. I handed him the 5. "Keep the change, I guess." Then I hesitated. No, screw that. I needed that quarter for the parking meter in the morning. I sighed. "Actually, hold on." I bent down, my knees cracking, and got on the floor to fish for it. My fingers brushed against something sticky and I recoiled. And that's when it happened. The door didn't ding-dong. It exploded inward, slamming against the wall with a crash that shook the whole flimsy building. A man, Travis, screamed something. Nobody moved. "Get on the fucking ground." His voice cracking high and reedy with cheap adrenaline. I was already on the ground. My world narrowed to the dusty space under the rack of Skittles. Then came the sound, a deafening, flat crack that was nothing like in the movies. It was so loud it felt physical, like a punch to the ears. A hot wind whipped past my head, and something rained down on my back, plastic shards, what felt like powdered sugar, the smell of ozone and burnt popcorn. The bullet had torn through a bag of mini donuts on the shelf right where my head had been a second before. My body went cold. I couldn't breathe. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. But as I lay there, my cheek pressed against the grimy linoleum, I risked to look up. Travis was waving the gun at the counter, screaming for the cash, and that's when I saw Elias. His face was white, sure, like all the blood had drained out of it, but his eyes, they weren't wide with fear. They weren't even focused on Travis, they were just vacant. His hands were still flat on the counter, fingers slightly spread as if he were about to play a chord on a piano. He hadn't ducked, he hadn't flinched. The sound that had just ripped the world in two had earned nothing more than a slow, deliberate blink. In that moment, with my ears ringing and my life hanging by the thread of a dropped coin, I swear to God I was more afraid of him than I was of the guy with the gun. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 3 minutes. Travis snatched the cash from the drawer, it wasn't much, and bolted, the ding-dong of the door chiming mockingly on his way out. And then silence. A thick, heavy silence, punctuated only by the ringing in my ears and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and gunpowder. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up. My hands were trembling so badly I had to use the candy rack for support. My eyes went straight to the hole in the donut display. It was a perfect dark circle, a tiny void in reality. I looked down at the quarter, still gleaming innocently by my shoe. I felt a wave of nausea. Did you? I started, my voice a croak. I looked at Elias, expecting I don't know what I expected. A shared look of terror, a shaky sigh of relief. A desperate, holy shit, we're alive. He didn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on the cash drawer, which was hanging open like a broken jaw. With a strange, unhurried grace, he reached out and gently pushed it closed. It clicked shut. Then he straightened a stack of lottery scratchers that had been knocked askew. It was the most insane thing I had ever seen. He didn't move, I whispered, mostly to myself. You didn't even move. That's when the sirens started, a distant wail that grew into an overwhelming scream. Red and blue lights pulsed through the storefront window, painting the aisles in frantic, strobing colors. Two cops came in, guns drawn, all business. A third, older officer, D'Amico, came over to me while the others cleared the store. I was a mess. I was trying to explain what happened, but the words kept getting stuck, tumbling over each other. I kept pointing, the donuts, my head was right there, the quarter, and then my focus shifted back to the real problem. But him, the cashier, you have to ask him, he wasn't scared. He just stood there, he didn't even press the silent alarm, did he? There's a button right there, isn't there? He just watched. Officer D'Amico had the patient, weary look of a man who had seen it all. He nodded, writing in his little notepad. Son, shock affects people in different ways, he said, his voice calm and patronizing. Fight, flight, or freeze sounds like he just froze up. It's perfectly normal. But it wasn't a freeze. I saw a deer in the headlights once. This wasn't it. This was acceptance. Later, I overheard them taking Ilya's statement. It was insultingly brief. A guy came in with a gun, Ilya said, his voice flat. He asked for the money, so I gave it to him, then he left. And how were you feeling during this? The younger cop asked. There was a pause. I leaned closer, desperate to hear his answer. Scared, Ilya said. I was too scared to move. And that was it, the perfect, logical, bulletproof explanation. The paramedics checked me over, said my blood pressure was sky high, but I was fine. They wrapped a foil blanket around my shoulders. I felt like a child. As they led me out, I looked back one last time. Elias was behind the counter, methodically sweeping up the donut debris with a small dustpan and brush, as if he were just cleaning up a minor spill at the end of a very long, very ordinary shift. I couldn't let it go. In the days that followed, sleep became a stranger. Every time I drifted off, I was back on that floor, the smell of gunpowder in my nostrils, looking up at Elias' blank face. Officer D'Amico's words, fight, flight, or freeze, echoed in my head, but they felt hollow, a cheap explanation for something that felt profoundly wrong. You don't just freeze with that kind of placid composure. You don't tidy up a crime scene with the methodical calm of a librarian reshelving books. My therapist told me I was projecting my own unprocessed trauma onto him, that I was fixated on Elias because it was easier than confronting my own mortality. Maybe she was right, but it felt like a lie. It felt like I had been shown a glitch in the matrix and everyone else was trying to convince me it was just a smudge on my glasses. So I did what any sane, traumatized person would do. I started digging. My late-night doom-scrolling sessions turned into obsessive deep dives. I started with the basics. The Quick Mart's location, employee records, anything public. It was a dead end. But then I started cross-referencing Elias' name, Elias Vance, according to the police report I'd managed to glimpse, with local news archives and public records. That's when I found the first thread, the reality thread. It was a juvenile court record, sealed, but the case summary was partially visible in a cached newspaper article from about 10 years ago. An armed robbery at a warehouse, 4 teenagers involved. One of them had a last name that matched Elias, though the first name was redacted. The details were sparse, but it painted a picture of a kid who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, in a world where seeing a gun wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime trauma but a Tuesday. It made a grim kind of sense. Maybe Elias wasn't calm, maybe he was just numb, maybe he'd seen so much worse that a strung-out junkie like Travis was just background noise. Maybe he knew him, maybe it was a setup. The thought was chilling, but it was a logic I could grasp. It was a human explanation. But then, late one night, tumbling down a rabbit hole of local forums, I found the other thread. The impossible thread. I landed on a crusty, outdated website dedicated to Lakeshore County oddities. Tucked between posts about a supposed lake monster and sightings of a ghostly hitchhiker was a thread about the Quick Mart. It was started years ago. The first post read, "Anyone else ever notice the guy who works the night shift at the Quick Mart on Route 9, the quiet one? There's something not right about him. It's like he's not really there." My blood ran cold. I scrolled down. Post after post, spanning nearly a decade from different anonymous users, all described the same thing. Not always Ilya's, the names were different, but the description was identical. A quiet, pale, unnervingly still night clerk. One user claimed he saw the clerk standing outside during a violent thunderstorm, completely drenched, just staring at the sky without blinking. Another told a story about a car accident that happened right in front of the store. The clerk supposedly didn't even look up from his magazine. The stories were insane, unverifiable, the kind of stuff you dismiss as local folklore, but one phrase kept repeating in post after post. It's like he's a fixture. Like he came with the building. And the most recent post, from just 6 months before my incident, ended with a line that made me shut my laptop and sit in the dark for a full hour. It said, "I swear to God, things just miss him. Spills, accidents, trouble, it's like he stands in the quiet spot of the storm." Wow, okay, didn't expect this to get so much attention. Thanks for all the messages, guys, seriously, it helps. A lot of you are saying I should just let it go, that I'm obsessing over nothing, you're probably right. But a few of you asked if I remember anything else, any small detail from that night. And the thing is, I do. It's been churning in the back of my mind for weeks, a piece of the memory that didn't fit. My brain was so overloaded that night, it was like a corrupted video file. But the more I replay it, the more this one frame sharpens into focus. It's just a split second, right before Travis screamed, right before the gun went off. It's the moment I was bent over, looking for the quarter. My head was down, but I could see out of the corner of my eye. And I saw Elias. He wasn't looking at Travis bursting through the door. He wasn't even looking at me on the floor. His head was tilted just slightly, and his gaze was directed over my shoulder at a point high on the wall behind me. He was staring with that same empty, placid expression directly at the cheap plastic display of mini donuts, the exact spot where the bullet hit less than a second later. That memory fragment was the tipping point. The line between trauma-fueled obsession and genuine investigation had been crossed. I had to know. I had to see him again, look him in the eye, and ask him. I didn't even know what the question was exactly. Did you know you were going to be robbed? Are you a ghost who came with the building? Why weren't you scared? It all sounded insane when I said it out loud to the empty air in my apartment. But I didn't care. It took me a week to work up the nerve. I drove to the Quick Mart late at night, the same time as before, my heart hammering against my ribs with every mile. I felt like I was returning to the scene of a crime, my own near execution. The fluorescent lights of the store glowed in the darkness like a malevolent beacon. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. Finally, I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked towards the door. The ding-dong chime was like a physical blow, but I forced myself to walk through. The place was exactly the same. The same smell, the same hum, the same sticky spot on the floor where I'd knelt, but the man behind the counter wasn't Elias. It was a chubby kid with acne and a name tag that read Kevin, and he was engrossed in his phone. The donut display had been replaced. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hoarse. Kevin looked up, annoyed. "Yeah. I'm looking for the guy who used to work the night shift, Elias." He shrugged. "No, before my time. That guy quit like the day after the robbery. That's why they hired me." He looked me up and down. "You a cop?" "No," I said, my stomach sinking. "No, just an old friend." It was a lie, and a bad one. The kid clearly didn't believe me. He went back to his phone. I stood there for a moment, feeling like an idiot. My grand confrontation, my search for answers, had ended before it even began. He was gone, vanished. Defeated, I turned to leave. As I walked past the counter, something caught my eye. It was on the inside panel below the register, a spot only the cashier would see. It was a carving scratched deep into the cheap laminate wood with what looked like a pocket knife. It was a small, intricate symbol, a spiral twisting in on itself, but at the center it looked like a snake eating its own tail. An Ouroboros, it was small, almost unnoticeable, but it felt ancient and deliberate. It felt like a signature left behind. I stared at it for a long time, the hum of the coolers buzzing in my ears, feeling further away from an answer than I had ever been. So that's where it ends, or rather that's where the trail goes cold. I never found Elias. I drove by his last known address from the police report. It was a transient motel that had been torn down 6 months ago. He doesn't exist on social media. As far as the world is concerned, Elias Vance was a ghost who punched a time clock for a few months and then simply evaporated. The spiral carving meant nothing to the cops or the store owner. It was just vandalism. Travis got caught a few weeks later trying to rob a liquor store with the same gun. He got 10 years. It should have felt like closure. It felt like nothing. I don't go to the Quick Mart anymore. I don't go to any convenience store if I can help it. My world has shrunk. The real damage from that night wasn't the hole in the donut display. It was the hole Elias punched in my understanding of the world. He showed me that the floor of reality is thin, and you have no idea what's swimming underneath. Now I watch people, it's a habit I can't break. On the subway, in line at the bank, at the grocery store, I look for the calm ones, the ones who stare into the middle distance while a baby is screaming or a couple is fighting. And every time I see one, a man with vacant eyes waiting for a bus, a woman staring placidly at a flickering departure screen, a cold dread washes over me. I feel that same fear I felt on the floor of the Quick Mart. I survived, that's what everyone tells me, I was lucky. But the price of that luck is that I can no longer trust a calm face. I can no longer believe that stillness means peace. Because you never really know what's behind that quiet. Is it just a soul numbed by the hardships of life, or is it something else? Something that stands in the quiet spot of the storm, watching, waiting, and knowing exactly where the bullet is going to hit. Hey everyone, it's Owen. I'm probably not going to post in this thread again. I've been seeing Dr. Albright twice a week, and we're making progress, I guess. We're working on the idea that my brain needed a mystery to solve because the alternative, that my life was almost extinguished for no reason at all by a stupid random act, was simply too terrifying to accept. It's a neat psychological box to put everything in, it makes sense. I want to thank all of you, the ones who offered support and shared your own stories. It made me feel less crazy. For those of you who sent me down the Ouroboros rabbit hole of ancient symbols and alchemical texts, thanks, I guess. It was a weird weekend. I know I'll never get a real answer. Maybe Ilias was just a guy with a troubled past who was too jaded to be scared. Maybe he was an urban legend. It doesn't matter anymore. The story is over. But sometimes when it's late and I can't sleep, I think about that quarter. I think about bending down to pick it up. And a strange, cold thought sometimes slithers into my mind. Maybe I didn't just dodge a bullet that night. Maybe I dodged an invitation to stand on the other side of the counter, perfectly still and just watch, who knows.